Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Isola from Quag PD. He has 37 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to today's conversation. So welcome to the show, Chief Isola. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So 37 years in law enforcement, but you started in your teenage years in EMS. Can you give us a little bit of background into how you got started as a young teenager in the public safety first responder profession and what those 37 years have looked like for you so far?
Sure. I had family in law enforcement, but as a teenager, we lived by the water and we were just in the ocean constantly, grew up in the ocean. So as soon as I was old enough to be a lifeguard, I jumped on that position and just, it happened an incident where somebody, had needed CPR and the ambulance that came was short-staffed. So I was loaded into the back of an ambulance at 16 years old and, working on this individual for half an hour. To be, left in an emergency room wearing a Speedo was a little embarrassing. But that's kind of where I got hooked on that. And as soon as I turned 18, I joined our local volunteer ambulance, and I stayed with that through college. So that really what brought me into the first responder world. Yeah. So
And then after that, you decided that you wanted to be in law enforcement, and I'm guessing you had a number of assignments throughout your career. What do you think was your favorite assignment that you've ever had?
well, patrol was always a favorite for me. You're in the street working with the community. There's great camaraderie amongst your coworkers, and you're really out helping people, and it's different. It's something different every day. So you're not in an office. You're out moving around. It's different every day. Is a little excitement and a challenge, and you can create on your own, where you kind of take ownership of the area you're responsible for. And the department, thankfully, I was working with was open to innovation. So even as a young officer, you could bring new ideas
Mm.
and and foster new programs, and they would embrace that. So that was a great proponent for me to excel in the department I work in.
Yeah. Do you think that because you came from that environment where your opinions were valued, do you think that that helped you with how you lead today? Do you think that impacted the way that you lead? Because it sounds to me like that helped with your wellness and your advancement throughout the career to have leadership who really took account what you thought and encouraged that.
I definitely did. And for me, the opportunity again started in EMS. In
Yeah.
college, I was part of an EMS campus EMS unit, which, at 18, 19 years old, you're seated with a lot of responsibility. So I wasn't at the parties. I was responding to the parties.
Mm.
While I was still a college kid, I was put in a position of responsibility. So that I think that kind of groomed me early on. And then again, back to the volunteer agency, I went up through the ranks just by chance. There were openings. I was encouraged to move up. So I learned a lot of my leadership skills that way at a young age. And I guess as I matured, uh, they got better. But I definitely think if you have somebody who's innovative and has a special skill or interest as a leader, how do you suppress that? You can't. You have to harness that and foster it, and it will always serve you well. Sometimes you have to keep them on the rails. It's in police departments. Everyone wants a helicopter and a dog, but if somebody's interested in a specialty, you have to foster that, and that's what I think builds great future leaders too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when you and I talked a little bit offline in the context of wellness, there was maybe some differences between your EMS experience and then your law enforcement career experience. What were some of the differences of how EMS handled wellness after an incident versus the PD side of things?
Right. So my exposure in the EMS world, if you had a horrendous incident or with the death of a young person or a violent death that you were dealing with, um, there was debriefings and they were available. It was almost standard. You would do that. But on the police side, that didn't happen. We kind of laughed it off with humor, and dealt with it in probably an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
And this was early in my career. We didn't have that, and even the fire services were better at that than we are. So but it did catch on. So I was sensitive to that early on. When I became a supervisor, I was very tuned to that. If we had an incident, regardless of the officer's age or experience, I always made sure that they processed that information and availed themselves of the minimal services that were available at the time. They've grown exponentially now, um, and I think we get it. It really all the warrior mindset. Um, as a society, we've learned to deal with the returning warriors much better than we did in the past. And I think the law enforcement officers fall into that category. They're basically in a warrior posture for 20 years plus, dealing with that. So, uh, we've gotten much better at it, absolutely. But early on, we really were not equipped for it. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of officers suffered as a result through their careers.
I think that we historically, and again, I think to your point, things are getting so much better, and we've seen so much traction and movement in a forward direction with wellness. But I think that we've underestimated the value of just talking about stuff, and even this idea of just labeling, like, man, that was hard, or like I felt stressed, or that made me sad, and just having those moments to offload some of that stuff. Talking about it is a really good and effective way to do so. But I think to your point, maybe historically it was stigmatized to do that, or maybe not a part of the culture to do that. And I think that now that's becoming more normal through the efforts of, individuals like yourself who are recognizing the importance of that and making that a part of your normal operation. It's
Right.
not something that's weird or abnormal. It's just something that you guys do, and it's something that's a part of the culture moving forward.
Right. And, as a paramilitary uh, uh, organizations, whether it's sheriffs or police agencies, we are paramilitary agencies. We follow the military's functionality in many ways. And when the military got better at it, we followed suit, thankfully.
Mm.
Um, and it continues to improve to the point where the new generation of officers, they don't know any better than the right way of processing stress and crises. It's just how we do it now, and it's aging out. There are officers, myself included, who were working this job when that wasn't the case. So very encouraged, for the future of law enforcement there, and all first responders.
Yeah.
Um, it's standard to deal with a stressful situation and what it does on your body and on your brain. And we treat the brain like a muscle. And, it's something that we're really not made to see. It definitely damages your brain muscle and you have to deal with it. And then you resume your normal activities. So it's become very routine. There's very little pushback now. The officers welcome it, they look for it, thankfully. So we've come a long way.
I'm so happy that you said that it damages you, and then there are ways to strengthen it, right? And so we know that trauma impacts your brain. It impacts your fear centers, your memory centers, your emotional centers. That happens automatically, especially with cumulative stress or trauma over time, right? And so I think if we can start to recognize that that happens basically automatically, right?
Right.
Then it's not a weakness. It's something that's happening to everybody. Everyone is being impacted by ongoing trauma. And so how can then to your point earlier, how can we strengthen those areas? How can we um, offset the trauma? And so there's lots of tools and ways that you can um, rebuild that mental resiliency, or that you can rewire your brain in order to be able to have that longevity instead of just taking like hit after hit after hit and continuing to damage your brain over time. What are some of the things that you have done for your own personal wellness? I know that you started, I mean, as a teenager, seeing traumatic events, and now, over 37 years later, you're still in this profession. And so, how have you been able to offload some of those things and be able to um, rewire or strengthen your brain?
Right. Well, I try and do as much exercise as I have time for. I think that's been a tremendous help. Um, I used to do it early in the morning before the day
Mhm.
would start, which was very helpful. Um, and just talking about incidents,
Yeah.
I try to shield over the years my family from the stressful incidents because you don't want to bring them to the scene of some horrific incident because your stories to them, I think they become part of the incident.
Mm.
They're processing and trying to imagine what you've gone through, which is stressful on them. So, um, I do have a very supportive family, although I don't bring home a lot of those horrific incidents to them. But they know, if it's been a long day, I may get on the bike, for an hour, and they know that okay, it was one of those days.
Mhm.
So I think a supportive family is key. I could admit, and I'm guilty of probably not utilizing the resources that are available as to the extent that I encourage my own people to do. Um, I think your tank can only hold so much, and regardless of whether you're processing that along the way, this is just my own theory. Um, you can only see so much until you're like, okay, I'm done, and it's time to get into farming or become an artist.
Mhm.
But that's yeah. I mean, I think so. I think physical exercise and trying to stay healthy as much as possible, not using alcohol and dangerous activity as a release, for processing stress and trauma.
Yeah.
So that's been my strategy.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said that the physical has helped with your mental because they are so interconnected. And I do think that it's easy to choose unhealthy coping mechanisms. I have personal experience with that in my life. It's easier not to feel, it's easier to avoid, to numb, to escape. And if you can have awareness and have that supportive unit outside of the job that can keep you grounded as well. I think that that's helpful, but realizing that there are healthy coping mechanisms, talking about it, exercise, there's so many different things that you can do that can help you to offload without going down that path of destruction. And trust me, like I get it. Like I know that it's easier to go and not deal with it, but I think that my one of my mottos has always been the only way out is through. You can't like take the long way around. I mean, you can, but there's a lot of bumps along the way if you
I
do
like
that.
that. Very good. Yeah,
Yeah, only way out is through. So you got to sometimes do the hard stuff that you don't want to do. And I understand that, you shed things down for a reason. And there are oftentimes the hardest things that you don't want to deal with, but there is freedom on the other end if you can get through that hard processing time. So
right, right. And we include the families and friends in our psychological assistance programs because they're really going through this with you.
yeah.
So not that it's you're offering free services to everybody but people that are in your inner circle are dealing with the things you're dealing with by way of your personality and how the job is impacting you. So we've reached out to them as well. A spouse or significant other of our law enforcement officers can reach out, and the more they learn and understand, the more help they can be to our officers in supporting them and understanding that, if an officer comes home and she's short on patience that day, the spouse will understand, the kids will understand. Um,
Yeah.
so it makes it easier. Yeah.
I
Because
really
they
like
go
that.
through this with us. They really do. We're dragging them along with us.
Yeah, I really like that approach because I think you're right. I think if you're gonna support home wellness, there's two sides of the coin, you know. So how can you support the kids and the spouses and then also support also the employee or the team member because we know it's not just officers, it's, you know, the entire team that's, you know, coming home to family. So I
Yeah.
wanted to maybe talk because I know when you and I talked offline that you said that you guys have built a great wellness program. And I know that the family support is a small piece of that. Can you maybe explain some of the other things that you guys have done that's been successful for building out your wellness program as a whole?
Sure. So I think the key, and you asked earlier if there's something that other uh, law enforcement leaders are looking to build a program is buy-in from your union and your personnel. So the first thing I did was approach them and ask them to help me build this program. So they weren't being told to do this. I was asking them to help me build this program.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the key, and they bought in immediately to the concept. And I have just a fantastic group of people um, through their experience and just who they are, made this is what's making this a success. So they bought into the concept of wellness and mental wellness and mental health. Um, and thankfully, they, through their own union, had started a psychological services program in addition to the one that we had already had access to employees called employee services.
Mhm.
But this was much more customized and readily accessible telehealth. So it was a much more accessible um, service. So in writing the policy, from the start, I said, this is not a one and done. We're going to continue to expand on this from three facets, from the young officer and the old officer to the mother, the father, and from a physical being, healthy eating, to a healthy duty chart. We worked long and hard on creating and adopting a healthy duty chart, going from what we call the wheel, which is you're changing, every week you're changing to a different shift, to a steady fixed shift.
Mhm.
So their bodies could adjust to that. So that was part of the process of building the program. Once we started with the shifts, once the shifts set in and people realized that they felt normal, where they're night people, they slept when they needed to sleep, they had a normal routine, their diets could adjust and not change every week. They started to feel better. So the morale was really good. So that kicked it off. So from there, we built the psychological services part of it. And then my municipality has a gym that's accessible, and they've been supportive in keeping it up to date. In fact, they refreshed and refurbished it 2 years ago. That's accessible for all of the employees. So the officers have access to that, which is a private gym. One of our officers is a physical fitness trainer. So he is available to provide instruction and dietary recommendations. Um, we've become much healthier too. We're not eating donuts anymore. They're eating, although they may be drinking more caffeine than I think they should have, but we're certainly a much healthier uh, profession. So that's what started it. And from there, I built a fitness challenge program, which gives them incentives for their level of fitness. And it's working very well. So we have about 65% buy-in on that, where officers are um, they're earning time off based on their level of fitness.
Thank
So
you for
I
giving
think
like a
it's
step
valuable.
by step. I think that that's really awesome. I love like tactical, like this is what we did and how we did it. I think that's really helpful, especially if there's anyone who's listening who is trying to piece together a wellness program or is really struggling to get the buy-in. I want to kind of reiterate this and make sure that I understand correctly. So first you started off by saying, hey, this is a team environment and I need your help. I want to know what's important to you, and we're going to build this together. This is not something I'm going to force you to do. I want this to feel like a team unit when it comes to supporting your wellness. Then you started with how can we get the shifts to be successful so that you guys can start to have some sense of normalcy and you can have that routine that you're used to. Then we're going to support your psychological wellness. Then we're going to make sure that we're also supporting your physical wellness. And because you did that, you're having better performance and you have 65% of your agency that is consistently utilizing these resources and buying into the programming.
Correct, correct. And it continued on from there. We Once we realized that people were in a better state of fitness,
Mhm.
we then opened up our defensive tactics regime to a more realistic and actually on the mat, not just walking through. So we're bringing in through again through our fitness and defensive tactics instructor some jujitsu
Mhm.
and some more physical attributes to doing the job and doing it safely and more efficiently and that's been tremendous too. So that's been part of it.
Yeah.
So we do that at least twice a year, which has given we've lowered our use of force needs. When somebody's more confident and competent,
Yeah.
um, they can very quickly control somebody. And I think when someone's resisting or is aggressive, when they know someone's hand is on them and they know it has control of them, a lot of times it subdues and de-escalates the situation, and it's reduced our number of injuries too. So staying fit, this is one thing I would reiterate to the new officers that are coming in is your level of fitness is part of the job and
Yeah.
is one of the requirements because you don't know when you're going to be called to enter the Olympic event. And you have to be ready for it, for
Yeah.
your family, for the people you're serving. Um, and it's a healthier way to life, incidentally, as well. So I don't know if I got off topic there, but
No,
that,
not at all. So you are seeing a direct correlation between your wellness efforts and performance on the job. You're seeing less use of force, you're seeing better decisions, you're seeing less injuries, all due to the front end work that you guys are putting in your wellness programming.
yes, correct. Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
love that. And I love that. I think that that approach is great. I think 65% is huge. What would you say to someone who is in leadership that maybe is worried about underutilization of programming and maybe doesn't do things because they're, I wouldn't say afraid, but maybe they're thinking that people aren't going to use it?
right. I think I, if you if you can, I don't want to say convince, but if you can make your officers feel like you're behind them and you're there to support them, ultimately so that they're providing the best service they can provide, which
Mhm.
is your ultimate mission.
Yeah.
But you care about them first, and that the steps you're taking, um, they may not be what they may not all agree with it, but the method is to help them do their job better in a more healthy way. So first you got to have your people behind you, and they have to know you're behind them,
Yeah.
and, and they have to understand that the chief wants us to run again, or he wants me to do this or that. It's all for their good, um, and that's the key. So for somebody who doesn't want to take the time to do that, I think they're cutting themselves short, and they're cutting their personnel short of of a method that is going to enhance their success in providing the best service they can.
Yeah.
So, and for somebody who really analyzes the cost measures and so on, which is it's a necessary action. I understand that. Um, but just imagine, an agency or an officer that's unfit and gets hurt, doing something that if they were a little bit more well-rounded in their fitness, wouldn't have been a big deal.
Mhm.
So, that's also important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, you have to take a look. Sometimes things are hard to, how do I want to say this? Sometimes it's hard to say this equals this, right? But if you take a look at the cost of injury, if you could prevent one injury, then the cost for the wellness programming usually pays for itself. And sometimes it's hard to identify, did this reduce injury? And so sometimes you do have to try things out and pilot things for a period of time and track and measure. But if you can prevent one injury, then usually it's totally worth it. So I do think, to your point, of course, like funding is always going to be a challenge. But I think hearing people like you who have invested in wellness and who are seeing that direct ROI on the investment that you're making in your people is now paying dividends on the back end because you are seeing less injury and you're seeing better performance out in the community.
Right. And just a clear explanation of what your end goal is. You know,
Yeah.
I have policy um, that for cardiac screening, if officers involved in a physical altercation or in general, a stressful situation, whether it's a physical pursuit, a foot pursuit, a car pursuit, or something strenuous, or the fight or flight reaction, where you have a rush of an adrenaline, whether they're 55 or 25, they are to be screened for cardiac event.
Mhm.
And I remember when I first deployed that, they were looking at me crazy, and I said, "I'm not asking you. I want to make sure that you don't go home, and 8 hours later you have a cardiac event," which I learned from the fire service that was a pretty common incidence
Yeah.
in the early days where firemen would do their job and they would go home and have a cardiac event, hours later.
Mhm.
So, um, you're putting your system to a test, and then you're shutting it off.
Yeah.
And you have an underlying or congenital issue, it may show itself. Here goes our fire station. So, um, but once they understood that, now they don't, at first they're like, I go to the hospital now,
Mhm.
but so now they embrace it and they appreciate it. They
Yeah.
appreciate it. So,
Yeah, well, I think it just goes back to what you said. If you're letting them know that this is for their own benefit because you care about them, and then everyone has to do it, so it's not singling anybody out. It's like this is normal policy that we're doing across the board. I have a friend, he's actually local out here, but he runs a nonprofit because he was a young 20, I think he was like 26-ish, 26, 28, SWAT guy, great health. And he had a cardiac event at home with his fiance, who's his now wife. And she was studying to be a nurse, I believe. And so she knew some of the things to do in that moment. But he tells this powerful story about how he literally died. Like he was, I think it was 8 minutes, because the first person on the scene was law enforcement, but they didn't have the AED and the things that they needed, so they had to wait for fire to show up to help. And he tells this really, really powerful story about that experience. And now he has dedicated his life to cardiac survivors, and he helps law enforcement agencies to get training and AEDs so that when they are first on the scene, they know what to do and they have the resources to do so. But through that relationship, I've learned a lot about, cardiac health. And the statistics are showing that the majority of deaths are because of a cardiac event. And I think previously the numbers were so heavy on suicide, which is still a huge issue and concern. But now they're starting to see that the majority of deaths within the first responder profession are because of cardiac events. So
Right.
I think that having that, I think anytime you can be proactive is always going to be better. It's always going to pay dividends in the end, and it's always harder because who wants to do something when they feel good and they feel like they don't need it? Usually it's not until there's an event, but if you can start to look at those numbers, what's that saying? It's if it's predictable, it's preventable.
Yeah.
Is that the saying? And so if
Yeah.
you know that these things are happening, then how can you try to prevent those things from
Right.
happening?
Right. And I mean, our profession is known for that. The first
Mhm.
responders, they're susceptible to heart disease based on their lifestyle. The shifts add to that. Your sleep pattern affects the cortisol in your body and your diet and everything else. So coming into it, I think it's become more prevalent that officers are in tune to it. There are cardiac screening. Um, Mobile units that go around every few years, and the officers that literally park behind our headquarters, and the officers go through a screening.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's proactive, and I think that's pretty widely used.
Yep.
But now they're much more in tune to their cardiac health and screening. And again, I thank the unions for that.
Hmm.
'Cause, the municipal health plans are not as ambitious about preventative. They'll treat you, but the preventative part is an expense they're not really focused on.
Yeah.
So
One of the things I wrote down that I thought was really interesting that you said too was trying to identify the different needs within the organization, and understanding one, that it's not a one size fits all. But some of the things that you said was um, having different things for people who are at different phases in their career. So, younger people might be more receptive to this or be saying that they need this, whereas maybe the older generation is looking for something else. I have a two-part question for you. One, did you see when you were getting feedback from your team, was there anything that you saw that like maybe the older generation was looking for versus the younger, like a difference in what they were asking for or in their needs? And then the second part is, what is next for you guys? How are you continuing to evolve and build out your programming, or what do you think the future of law enforcement wellness is going to look like?
right. Well, I think the future will be a much healthier officer throughout their career. I think fitness is in right now.
Mm,
It's the new way to look. And it used to be like a Dallas thing or a California thing where there's a gym on every corner.
yeah.
Uh, but that's spread. So I think generationally, I think you'll see a much healthier officer. Um, and for the other part of your question, I did see differences, and I could give you an example, which is part of our wellness program, is the chaplaincy
Mm,
program. I have two chaplains they're non-denominational. Whether they're a Catholic priest or a reverend or a rabbi, they're there for spiritual support if it's asked for. And my older officers, they got it. They understood it. The younger officers were like, "What does a chaplain do for me?" So
mm,
I had to try and navigate that. And it's kind of a tradition. The chaplain is kind of an old school position. Um, so that was one of the um, most obvious for me is trying to
yeah.
educate the newer officers that this is what a chaplain is. Um, and for the future, our fitness program, and it does address the seasoned officers versus the newer officers. So we use the Cooper standard, um, which is our entry level standard anyway. And I didn't want to invent my own. So we use the Cooper standard, but for somebody who might have, years of service and maybe has a bad knee, the Cooper standard has a running portion. And while an officer may be fully capable of sprinting and climbing a fence, that mile and a half run may leave them limping for a couple days.
Right.
So we're looking at, alternatives to that so that the officers, I don't want to say older officers, but officers that have maybe a weakness can still demonstrate their fitness and still achieve the rewards of their fitness level with other tests. Um, maybe I'm thinking maybe a duration of CPR by themselves, which is not easy to do. But instead of the run, and you choose the fitness level, you do 5 minutes of CPR, or
Yeah.
as long as you can go, and we can measure that. So that's the next level of fitness. And or somebody has a bad shoulder and they can't do push-ups well, or a bad wrist, but they can do pull-ups. So maybe they can
Yeah.
exchange, it's still a test of their physical fitness. So that's what we're looking at for the future. And the mental wellness is just, it continues to expand um, in the numbers. We have one psychologist that I run into, and I had a meeting last time. He said, this is working because when I go into my waiting room, I hear young officers on their cell phones on a regular basis that are like, I can't talk now, I'm going to therapy. So it's like not even a big deal anymore. It's like, stop
Yeah.
at the car wash. Yeah, I got to go to therapy. I'll see you after. So which is just a testament to the success it's having. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
think that's a huge win
yes,
to hear people being like, "Hey, gotta call you back. I'm gonna go see my therapist." And
yeah,
it's not shameful. They're not fearful of saying that. I think that's a huge win. And I really appreciate the out of the box thinking because I think that when you think of fitness standards, there's a lot of fear there too, where people are afraid that they're going to be deemed unfit to do their job. And so you recognizing, hey, like we understand that this job takes a toll on you physically over time, especially for individuals who didn't have that focus earlier in their career. Like we know people who are, further along in their career, there wasn't wellness programming that was being proactive and trying to reduce injury and all the things. And so for you to say, hey, like we recognize that as you get older, maybe you do have a knee thing. Maybe you got back stuff, maybe you got shoulder stuff. How can we adapt it so that we're still putting you through some sort of standard, but it's something that we know that you can do to be successful and so that you feel successful. And there's not the fear that if you can't run that mile and a half or whatever it is with a bad knee that you're going to lose your job or people are going to judge you. So I really appreciate that out of the box thinking.
yeah. And we're surrounded by water. We're a beachfront community. Um, I would even let them swim. You don't
Mm,
want to run? Okay, then swim. You want to swim a half a mile, and your fitness can do that. Why not?
yeah.
So it's things like that. But you have to be, I think you have to be. Uh, I can't think of another word, but courageous enough to say, I'm going to do this, and there may be some risk, and but there's not many gains without a little risk, calculated. So I think in law enforcement, we don't train as hard as we need to because we're afraid of people getting hurt and
Mm,
coming off the duty chart. Um, but then you're really not prepping yourself for the real thing. So
yeah.
it's a balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What words of wisdom would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
It's funny. I actually literally just said these things to somebody a month, not 2 weeks ago. Um, the officers have to be their own officer. There's a wonderful group of people that get into this field, and emulate the good guys, and don't let anybody slow you down.
Mm,
Don't let your ambition be quashed, or just I say detach the anchors. Don't let anybody slow you down, and you want to set out and help somebody every day. That's really, a lot of the markings are protect and serve, and yes, we do that, but we help. That's what we do is help. It could be help in a negative interaction where I need to give you a speeding ticket because I need to help you slow down, but you're helping somebody every day. It's really what you need to focus on. So that's what I tell the new officers. I told the new officer that if you could try and help somebody every day, it could be as mundane as um, giving somebody directions, but you just help somebody. That's what you're supposed to be doing every day. And as far as, a lifestyle, just treat your body like a tool. And it may be cliche, but you're an athlete, you're a professional athlete, and treat your body that way because, the professional athletes, they take care of their body. That's what earns them their living.
Yeah.
Uh, and law enforcement officers are no different. You need your body and your physical abilities to perform your job. It could save your own life, your partner's life, uh, a member of the public's life. The more fit you are and ready to do your job. So it's a job requirement. So, and I think that's what we're seeing. You don't see many out of shape law enforcement officers. They're taking it seriously, and that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you. Thank you
no,
for coming on and spending an hour with
oh,
me. I
pleasure.
appreciate your time so much. I had a lot of fun. I liked this conversation a lot, so thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much. You're inspiring too with your story, and your channel is fantastic stuff. So
Thank you.
thank you for recognizing us.
Of course.
Yeah,
We'll talk soon.
good to see you. Be
You
well.